You are standing at a crossing, waiting for the light to change. There is nothing special about the moment. A delivery bike slides between two cars. Someone beside you checks their phone, then checks it again, as if the answer might have changed in 3 seconds. Across the street, a small crowd is gathered at the opposite curb, half turned away from you, their faces broken up by traffic, glass, distance, the reflection of the afternoon in a shop window. Then one of them becomes familiar. Not slowly, not after careful inspection. You do not think. That might be the eyes, or that looks like the way she holds her shoulders, or that coat is similar to one she owns. The recognition arrives before any of that. It comes as a small internal click, so fast and quiet that you almost miss the order of events. First, you know. Then, a moment later, you begin looking for reasons. The person is still partly hidden by a bus passing through the junction. The face is not clear enough to be useful in the ordinary sense. You can't really see the nose. The mouth is there and then not there. The eyes are more suggestion than evidence. But already the crowd has changed. It is no longer a crowd with someone familiar possibly inside it. It is a crowd with that person in it. That is the odd part. Recognition does not feel like solving. It feels like something coming forward from the background. A second ago, there were people across the street. Now there is a person. And if the person next to you turned and asked, quite reasonably, "How did you know it was her?" you might find yourself in immediate trouble, because you would know that you knew, but explaining how would be much harder. The difficulty usually begins with a very ordinary question. Someone asks, "What does he look like?" And you open your mouth confidently at first because this is someone you know. You could pick him out of a station concourse. You could recognize him from the back of a lecture hall, from a thumbnail in a group chat, from the half-second glimpse you get through a train window as it pulls away. His face is not vague to you. It is one of the clearest social objects in your life. Then you try to describe it. Brown hair, maybe, medium height, the kind of eyes that are, well, not small exactly. A face that is, quite narrow, except not especially narrow. The nose is normal, which is possibly the least useful sentence ever produced by a human being. You add something about the eyebrows, then immediately lose confidence in it. You say, you'd know him if you saw him, which is true, and also not an answer. This is the strange imbalance of faces. We recognize them with an ease that makes the act feel simple, then fail to translate them into words that would help anyone else do the same thing. In one study, researchers estimated that the average person may know roughly 5,000 faces, not as a fixed number, not as a biological limit, but as a careful estimate from a small laboratory task. Still, it is a startling scale to hold in mind. Thousands of faces, people you love, people you used to know, people from school, work, television, old neighborhoods, half-forgotten photographs, lives that brushed against yours once and left behind a shape. And yet take one familiar face, just one, and try to rebuild it in language. The whole thing begins to fall apart, which suggests that when you recognize someone, you are not simply running down a list of features and ticking them off. Eyes, yes. Nose, yes. Mouth, yes. Person, found. Whatever is happening, it is stranger than that. A face is almost insultingly difficult to reduce to parts. You can describe the components, if you have to. 2 eyes, a nose, a mouth, cheekbones, chin, forehead, hairline. The usual inventory. It sounds complete, in the way a list of ingredients sounds complete, until you try to taste the meal by reading the packet. But a familiar face does not arrive as ingredients. It arrives whole. You do not usually recognize a person by first isolating the eyes, then adding the mouth, then checking whether the nose fits. That may be what you do later, when someone has asked you to explain yourself, and you are standing there politely failing. But recognition itself feels less like assembly and more like arrival. The person comes all at once, through a particular balance, a set of distances, a small internal weather. There is a simple way to feel this. Turn a face upside down, and something in your confidence changes. The same eyes are still there, the same mouth, the same arrangement, technically. Nothing has been removed, but the face becomes harder to read as a face you know. In a classic experiment from the late 1960s, researchers noticed this. People are especially disrupted by inverted faces, more than by many other familiar objects turned the same way. That matters because it hints at the kind of knowing involved. You are not only recognizing pieces, you are recognizing relations, the way the pieces sit with one another, the way the whole face holds together, the particular proportion that makes it that person, and not the person standing next to them. This is why a photograph can look oddly wrong when the expression is almost right, but not quite. The smile is there. The eyes are open. Nothing is obviously missing. Still, the person you know has somehow not fully arrived. The face is present, and yet the person is not. A familiar face is not a set of features. It is a pattern with a history attached. And the history can begin to speak even before the face itself is clear. Sometimes, the face is not even the first thing you recognize. You are walking down a street, and someone is ahead of you, 50 meters away. The light is behind them. The head is a dark shape. The clothes could belong to anyone. There is no useful detail in the face at all, but the walk is unmistakable. A slight forward tilt. A way of landing more heavily on one foot than the other, the shoulders rising for half a second before the turn, the rhythm of the person, which is not quite the face, not quite the body, not quite personality, but something that belongs to them in motion. You know them before they turn around. This is not a special talent. It is one of those ordinary human abilities that becomes uncanny only when you slow it down. In the 1970s, researchers showed people moving figures made only of small points of light, no skin, no clothes, no face, just dots marking joints in motion, and people could still sometimes recognize a friend by the movement. A person can be reduced almost to punctuation, and still some trace of them remains legible, which is slightly rude of us, really. We spend all that time choosing haircuts and glasses and jackets, and then someone recognizes us by the way our left shoulder gives up slightly when we walk uphill. But it makes sense. Familiarity is not stored in one neat place. It gathers. It gathers from the face, yes, but also from motion, posture, timing, distance, repeated encounters, the thousands of tiny regularities that become someone without ever becoming a good description. This is why the person across the street can become known before their face becomes clear. The recognition is not waiting politely for a passport-style view. It is working with fragments, a line of movement, a turning head, a half-seen profile, the angle at which someone occupies space. And then, because familiarity has spent years learning how this person moves through the world, something in you says, there, that one. But the moment you try to drag that kind of knowing into language, it begins to behave differently. You can feel it happen while you are describing someone. At first, the face is clear in your mind. Then you start choosing words, and the words behave badly. They are too general. They pull the face toward a category. Brown hair, square jaw, wide eyes. You can feel the living particularity of the face being flattened into a police-form version of itself. The more you describe, the more the face sometimes seems to blur. This is not just a private frustration. In a well-known experiment from the 1990s, people who were asked to describe a face in detail could later become less reliable at recognizing that face than people who did not describe it in that way. The effect is not a universal law, and it depends on the task. It does not mean that language ruins memory, or that description is useless. But it does suggest something important. The kind of knowledge that helps you recognize a face is not always helped by being forced into words. Think of the experiment less as a crime scene, and more as a very odd writing exercise. You are shown a face. Then you are asked to turn that face into sentences. You sit there trying to be precise. You choose the forehead. You choose the chin. You decide the eyes are close set. Then wonder whether close set is the right phrase. Then wonder whether the person would be offended, which is not relevant, but somehow arrives anyway. By the time you are done, you have made a verbal object. It is tidy enough. It has details. It sounds, on paper, as if it should help. But the verbal object is not the face. Worse, it may pull your attention toward the parts of the face that were easiest to name, rather than the whole arrangement that made the face recognizable in the first place. The description starts taking up space that used to belong to the face itself. That is the awkwardness at the center of this episode. Some of our most confident forms of knowing are not the ones that travel best through speech. You can know exactly which face belongs to your friend, and still produce a description that would also fit 12 other people, 3 actors, and at least 1 man in a coffee advert. Language is not the enemy. It is just not always the route by which the recognition arrived. And that matters, because recognizing a face, knowing who the person is, and finding the person's name are not the same event. They only feel as if they are when everything goes smoothly. You see someone coming toward you on the pavement, and the first thing that arrives is not a name. It is a pressure of familiarity. You know that you know them. That part is certain. Then, a little behind it, comes the search for where, work, school, that dinner, the friend of the friend with the dog, the person from the building who once helped you hold the lift. The face is present. The life around the face is still loading, and then the name, naturally, decides to be theatrical. It waits. You can feel it near the edge of speech. You know the first letter, maybe, or the shape of the name without the name itself, which is one of the more useless gifts the mind provides. You are smiling. You are saying hello. You are performing a highly convincing version of a person whose memory is fully operational. Inside, a small clerk is turning over papers in mild panic. This delay is embarrassing because it reveals the seams. We like to imagine recognition as one clean act. I see you. I know you. I name you. But ordinary life keeps showing us that these pieces can arrive out of order. The face can be familiar before the identity is clear. The identity can become clear before the name appears. The name can finally arrive 3 minutes later, usually while you are buying toothpaste. Psychologists have long treated these as separable stages, but you do not need a diagram to feel the point. You have lived it. A person can be instantly familiar and temporarily unnamed. A face can carry the feeling of someone before it hands over the facts. That is why the street crossing moment is so clean. It happens before the social machinery starts making demands, before the greeting, before the name, before the small terror of whether you are supposed to stop. For a second, there is only recognition. A face becomes someone. And because that someone matters so much, people have spent a long time trying to make faces less slippery, more transferable, more measurable, more official, as if identity could be made safer by turning it into a form. In the late 19th century, Alphonse Bertillon developed a system for identifying people through measurements. The idea had a certain administrative elegance. If names could be false and faces could change, perhaps the body could be made into a set of dependable numbers: limbs, head, ear, fingers, marks, categories. A person converted into a file that could be sorted, compared, retrieved. It is easy to smile at this now, but the impulse is understandable. A face, in ordinary life, is obvious and difficult at the same time. You know who someone is when you see them, but how do you hand that knowing to a stranger? How do you turn "I would know him anywhere" into something another person can use? Bertillon's answer was measurement, not warmth, not familiarity, not the strange whole-face arrival of recognition. Measurement, identity rendered into lengths and categories, as if enough careful entries could finally pin a person down. This is not a detour from the face. It is the same problem seen from outside. Systems need comparison, repeatability, a record. But the thing you experience at the crossing is not repeatable in that way. It does not arrive as ear length, jaw width, eye color, or any other clean fragment. The file may help identify, but it does not recognize. And modern systems, for all their different tools, are still living with a version of that old wish. Your phone can group faces in a photo album. An ID card can flatten a person into a small rectangle of light. Mouth closed, expression neutral, the face arranged for comparison rather than recognition. A database can hold images, match distances between points, return likely candidates, decide that this picture and that picture may belong to the same person. All of this can be useful. Some of it is astonishing. None of it needs to be turned into a sermon about modern life in order to be worth noticing. The point is simpler. A system can compare a face without finding it familiar. It can match images and never have the experience of someone appearing. It can sort, group, index, retrieve. It can say, these two faces are likely the same. It cannot have that tiny social shock you get when someone you know separates from the background of a crowd. Your own phone demonstrates the difference in a small domestic way. It may collect photographs of the same person into one folder, doing a quiet job of technical recognition. But when you scroll too quickly and your hand stops on a face you love, that is not just matching, that is a change in the room. The screen is still the screen, but suddenly there is someone inside it. A passport photo is information. A familiar face is not only information, it brings a history with it. Not necessarily a dramatic history. Maybe just the way someone says your name. The years when you saw them every Thursday. The particular expression they get when they are trying not to laugh. All of that arrives without being listed. The database has a record. You have familiarity. And familiarity returns us to the street. The light changes. The crowd across the road begins moving toward you. Not as a crowd now, but as many separate lives briefly sharing the same crossing. Bags against knees, shoes on the painted lines, someone stepping around a puddle, someone looking up too late because they were reading a message, and there is the face you knew before you could explain it. Closer now, clearer now, but in a sense, the important thing has already happened. You do not need to measure the face. You do not need to describe it. You do not need to identify the chin, the eyes, the mouth, the ratios, the official proof. You already crossed the invisible line between person as shape and person as someone. That is what recognition does when it works. It changes the social world. It gives weight to one face among many. It makes one small part of the street suddenly readable. A face is not only something you see, It is a way the world lets a person become present. And perhaps that is why the description fails. Not because you know too little, but because what you know is too bound up with the whole person to be taken apart cleanly. The face across the street is not an arrangement of features plus a name. It is the person who once stood beside you at a counter, the person whose laugh you can hear before it happens, the person whose absence in a room would also be recognizable, though you might struggle to say how. The traffic moves behind them. The shop glass catches the sky. For a second, everything is ordinary again. The crossing, the crowd, the damp edge of the curb. Then the person sees you too. Their face changes. And before either of you says a word, the recognition is already there.